Well, who are the Hare Krishnas? You might think of them in terms of chanting in the streets, fundraising at airports, saffron robes, these kinds of things. But they are much, much more. They recently celebrated their 50th anniversary with the International Society of Krishna Consciousness. In this episode, we're going to explore the history, the beliefs, the practices, the culture of the Hare Krishnas and ISKCON. We hope you'll join us. This is the Multi-Faith Matters podcast. I'm your host, John Moorhead. Well, this is the podcast for Multi-Faith Matters, and I am the host, John Moorhead, and I'm privileged today to have as my guest Anuttama Dasa, and I'll read a little bit of his bio. He is the Minister of Communications for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON, and he's been a member of ISKCON since 1975. Doesn't look like it, doesn't look that old, but that is the truth. He has served as a member of ISKCON's governing body commission since 1999. He currently oversees ISKCON temples in the Eastern and Midwestern United States, and he also serves on the board of ISKCON's international headquarters in, is it Mayapur?
That's it. That's right.
Wow, I got one. West Bengal, the Board of Religions for Peace, the Advisory Council of the Religious Freedom Institute, and former board member and vice president of the Religion Communicators Council. He is a busy man. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, John. I'm really happy to be here.
Is there anything you want to add to that bio that folks should know about you?
No, I think they're probably getting bored by the length of what you said already. So
okay. Well, I will put I'll put the full bio in the program notes and some other things so folks can seek you out. But the way this podcast came together, you and I were talking before we started recording, and I come from the evangelical Christian community, and many years ago I was doing what's called countercult apologetics approach. And one of the notables in that movement was the late Walter Martin. And he had a book called The New Cults, and he considered the Hare Krishnas a cult group. But I recently saw an article in Religion News Service, which talked about how ISKCON has gained respectability, the changes that have taken place over the years. And I thought it would be great to reach out and have a conversation to learn more and find out more about ISKCON. And I reached out to our fellow friend, Fred Stella, who's been a guest on this program a couple of times before, and he connected us. So this is going to be a great conversation. Now, you sent me a very helpful magazine called the Hare Krishnas Celebrating 50 Years, and folks will find a link to that in the program notes as well. And we're going to kind of use it as an outline to guide it. We're not locked into it, but it'll be helpful to kind of outline our conversation. But before we get into that, can you share your spiritual journey? How did you come to embrace this spirituality?
Okay, yeah, great. And then thanks again, John, for having me on your program. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I was raised in kind of a typical secular 1950s, 1960s family. Grew up outside Detroit and went to University of Michigan and Michigan State, both for a couple of years at Michigan State and one semester at University of Michigan. I was very much, I went to a Christian church camp for 12 years, a Presbyterian church camp. That was probably where most of my religious exposure was. And I was pretty much, as a young person, kind of turned off by religion in the sense I felt that the world was full of so many problems. This was early 70s. Just missed being drafted to go to Vietnam. So I was very aware of what was happening during that social milieu, and very much concerned about a lot of the social problems that are getting highlighted in those days in terms of environmental crisis, was just kind of scratching the surface, and women's rights and civil rights and all those different kind of things. And of course, global war threats in Vietnam. And it's kind of a long story, but it just led me to really look for some deeper answers. I felt when I went to university, I remember thinking, I'm going to go to college and really learn the answers to all the problems in life. And I was a little shocked at how the experts didn't agree. Nobody seemed to agree. We'd have one guest lecture come this week and say, here's how you raise the taxes and do this and do that. You're going to solve all the inner city problems. Then the next week, another expert would come and say, that doesn't work. And here's why it doesn't work. And then one thing led to the next. I got involved in student politics, and I found that very frustrating because even at that level, frankly, I found there was, corruption is a strong word, but even at that level, there was a lot of selfishness and self-motivation. And I was just kind of become frustrated by things all the way around. I started taking philosophy classes. Maybe there's some answer here. I was studying political science to try to figure how do we organize society in a way that's actually going to be fair and just and promote the common good. And my very best professor, I remember I had a conversation with him one time, and I said, these people were studying John Locke and Marx and Hobbes and Rousseau and even nasty people like Machiavelli. They all have their ideas how to organize society, but I noticed each one of them had a kind of set of assumptions in the beginning of their books. Marx had the idea that human history is based on class warfare and therefore a communist system. And Locke had the idea we're all independent actors and we entered social contracts just because we kind of had to, and therefore society should be designed like this. So I asked my professor, so we really should study the truth of these assumptions. Otherwise, what good are these theories if their assumptions aren't right? And his response to me was, we're not here to study truth. And I was thinking, well, why am I paying you all this money every year if you're not even sure if anything that we're studying is true yourself? In one sense, a little idealistic, but I think from a spiritual perspective, talking to a crowd of people who may be largely interested in spirituality, it made a lot of sense. So that kind of led to like a lot of search. I started to go to Zen Buddhist clinics, retreats. I started going to a Methodist church every Sunday and would have meetings with the minister and ask him questions. In those days, they're what they called Jesus freaks, hanging around on campus. I'd go and sit and talk with them for a few hours. I'd go hang out with the Hare Krishnas for 3 hours. And I became convinced that there's a common undercurrent in all of these messages. There really is a higher purpose in life, that wasn't that Christianity was completely opposed to Buddhism or the Hare Krishna was totally out of sync with the Jews for Jesus or whatever, and that there was an underlying theme. And then that I gradually, I became a vegetarian because I felt that was probably the right way to go. And as I mentioned, started going to all these different spiritual retreats. And then I actually left school. I traveled around the country for a few months with the idea that I really need to try to find God, and eventually moved into a Krishna temple just to kind of experiment with it with a little bit for a few weeks. And at the end of a couple of weeks, I thought, well, I'm going to stay here unless I find out one or two things. Either it's wrong or there's something better. And that was about 45 years ago. I don't live right in a temple ashram. Now I'm a congregational member. But, that was what got me going. And I deeply believe, and my tradition teaches that the purpose of life is to connect with God, and that everything else is secondary, and that everyone should do that, whether as a Christian or as a Muslim or as a Jew or as a Buddhist or Hindu, that's the most important thing in life. So that's kind of how I got to what I'm doing now.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I think sometimes, particularly for Christians, we so get into doctrine and worldview that it becomes abstract. And I appreciate you sharing that, the personal story. Everyone has a journey that they're on, and I like hearing from yours. Now, the beginnings of ISKCON go back to the 1960s and the counterculture as a Swami comes from India. Can you talk about the origins of ISKCON?
Yeah, actually, that's the recent origins of the organization. So to go back historically, our tradition is based on the Bhagavad Gita, which is like our sacred text. It's the third most popular sacred text behind the Bible, the Quran, in the world, and literally means the song of God. So that's the recorded words, we believe, historically recorded words of Krishna, which is a name for God. And it teaches all kinds of different processes of yoga and meditation, and kind of presents a whole worldview. And then the end of the book says, hey, the ultimate goal is to be a devotee of God, surrender to God. So we trace our roots there. And then in the 16th century, interesting, because kind of parallel to some of the Reformation that went on within the Christian churches at that around that same time, there was a great saint called Chaitanya, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who emphasized the devotional or the bhakti tradition. And really, scholars say kind of started a whole kind of a spiritual revolution within India itself, getting away from kind of the rituals and some of the things that were happening in Europe at the same time. The religious powers of the church had the authority. You could only approach God through the church. It was very ritualistic, very dogmatic, class conscious and all of that. And if you weren't in the right family, in the right place, the right amount of money, selling indulgences and those kind of things in Europe. So it didn't manifest the same way in India, but there were parallels. So Chaitanya was a big reformer to bring about an emphasis of, no, God is available to everyone. And he kind of took into the streets, you could say, his teaching and his preaching. And, he's a whole interesting historical character. From that, my teacher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, he came to America in 1965 under the instructions of his teacher, coming in this line from Krishna to Chaitanya and then down through different heads of the organization, the community. He was asked by his teacher, please spread this teachings of Krishna around the world, particularly in the West and English-speaking languages. So at the age of 70, without any institutional support whatsoever, he got a free passage on a freight ship. He translated 3 volumes of what are in addition to Bhagavad Gita, there's another scripture called the Bhagavat Purana. He translated 3 volumes of that and had it published in English. Thought that was his gift, that he was prepared to come to the West, and he came to America, and that's a whole very interesting history there. But he first landed he landed in New York, but went to Butler, Pennsylvania, lived with a family there for about 30 days, kind of studying a little bit how do things work in America, and then transferred to New York City, Lower East Side, and lived with a Swami of another order for some period of time, just a month or two, and then just kind of started his own mission. And from there, it took off.
Now, it's a simple question, but it's a lot to unpack. I think in the past, Hare Krishnas, there was a stereotype. They were known for chanting, fundraising at airports and these kinds of things, but there's a lot more to the Hare Krishnas than that. What are some of the beliefs and practices of the Hare Krishnas?
Yeah, it's actually very deep philosophy. It's a very philosophical tradition. So some of the core beliefs are, first and foremost, that God is a person. God is not just a thing or an energy, as some traditions speak, but we believe God is we use this term, the supreme personality of Godhead. I think Godhead is a term that is used in Christianity sometimes, if I'm correct. So we believe God is the supreme, like we're all persons. John's a person, Anuttama's a person, my wife's a person, my grandkids are persons. So we're all persons, but God is the supreme person. We're all individual. Atma is the Sanskrit word, which means soul. We're individual spiritual beings. We have an eternal relationship with God, the Father, or in Sanskrit, it's Krishna. Hare Krishna means God. Krishna is a name of God, means all attractive. We have an eternal relationship with God, and we've forgotten that relationship with him. Therefore, as I believe our Christian friends say, we're now separated from God, and this life is an opportunity to reconnect with God. And kind of the Eastern concept comes in. I don't think this is so much developed in Western theologies. Well, maybe there's some parallel with the devil. There's this concept of Maya, which means forgetfulness or illusion. So under illusion, under forgetfulness of God, I think I can be happy in this world with money and power and fame and, beauty. I got a handsome husband or a beautiful wife or a big house on the lake, and that these things will make me happy. But our tradition teaches no, they can't, because we're spiritual. We need spiritual solutions to life's problems. And while we can live comfortably in this life, we should simplify our lives. You don't need a new car every year. You don't need the newest smartphone. Maybe you can use the old one for a few more years, despite what the ads tell us that bombard us every single day of our lives. So we should try to simplify our lives. Sometimes Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, he would say simple living, high thinking. So we should try to simplify our lives and focus more of our attention on understanding our relationship with God. So these are the main concepts, different from Christianity as it's understood today, or as our traditions understood today. We believe that the soul is eternal, and in the sense that if we don't surrender to God in this life, that we come back again. We're not the body. I've got a male white body born in America this time around. Maybe next time I'll be a woman, black woman in Africa, et cetera. We don't know where we came from, where we're going, but because we've rebelled against God, our tradition teaches we reincarnate, or the soul will again take another body until we connect with God. And could be a long time or could be short time, depending on how we use our free will. So those are some of the basics. The chanting comes in because the chanting is a prayer. We chant what's called the Maha Mantra. It's very short, just Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, which really is a prayer that's often translated as, "Oh my Lord, oh energy of the Lord, please engage me in your service." So it's a call to God. Please engage me in your service. Please let me reconnect myself with you. To help me stop thinking I'm a big guy in the company, or I'm, the richest guy in the block. I want to understand that I'm your servant, and I want to reconnect with you. So the chanting, when you see Christian devotees chanting in public, it's because we believe that sound vibration of God's name actually helps people awaken their connection with Krishna. So even if people aren't aware of the meaning, or, some people love it, some people think it's funny, some people don't like it, but we believe that chanting itself is actually, it's good for me and it's good for others. So that's why we do it.
Well, in addition to the chanting, what would some other important practices be? If it's possible, what does the average daily life of a Krishna devotee, what would that look like?
Well, of course, it would depend. Most of our members now are living, are congregational members. So like myself, I'm about 25 minutes from the closest temple. So I can describe, my life. Of course, and I'm like, working for the institution. I'm kind of retired now, so I'm not in salary or anything. I'm a volunteer. But so let's say some people, a minority people, might live like in a temple, in a monastic environment. So for those people, they will do those first. They would get up very early in the morning. Our first worship services at our temple are usually at 4:30, maybe 5 a.m. So there's a worship service in the temple, goes for about 45 minutes. And then there's individual, what we call japa chanting. So we not only chant the Hare Krishna mantra publicly, as you referenced, we also chant, I think similar to Catholics and Muslims and Buddhists also, they chant on prayer beads. So we also use prayer beads, and we recite that same mantra with this meditation, "Oh my Lord, oh energy of the Lord, please engage in your service." So we do that for up to about an hour and a half or 2 hours a day. Generally, like myself, I don't watch television. I don't smoke. I don't drink. I save a lot of time from other things, and I spend more time trying to meditate on God's name. And I think a parallel within the Christian tradition, hallowed is thy name. I think the Psalms talks about you should glorify God with cymbals and harp. So, when we're on the street and people think, what are these crazy people playing cymbals? Well, we're glorifying God on cymbals. We don't do harps, but we do other instruments. So in the morning we have that morning program, and then with a scripture class. So usually the early morning hours from around 4:30 to 8 o'clock for those that live right in the temple ashram would be like totally focused on their spiritual practice. And then during the day, they would be doing different things, visiting members of the community. Some people involved in management or teaching or maintaining the temple, those kind of things. For most of us, like that are congregational members, we would have kind of a condensed spiritual practice every morning. We still would chant on our beads, our prayer beads, for an hour and a half to 2 hours every day, early in the morning before everybody gets up and starts disturbing everybody around you. And then we do some reading and then, go to work, whether I'm, a taxi driver or a doctor or a teacher or like that. And then depending on time, maybe again, some little spiritual practice in the evening, but then come to the temple on the weekends. Definitely Sunday morning, Sunday afternoons kind of become our main day, although historically in the tradition, there's no one day you go to temple every day, but because of just the modern day demands of Monday through Friday, most people, their community or their congregational worship day is primarily on a Sunday, although some people get together with families on a Friday night, like you might have like a Friday night Bible class together with your friends or something like that.
Now, we were talking before we started recording about discussing some significant or unique elements of the Krishnas as it distinguishes itself from other expressions of Hinduism? It's monotheistic. Can you talk about some of those unique aspects, and where does the Hare Krishna movement fit within broader Hinduism?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Well, Hinduism in itself, it's really kind of like a family of faiths or an umbrella of faiths. And sometimes I think, like, say within Christian, well, let's say there's the Abrahamic faiths who all are coming to have certain similarities in their background, certainly, roots to Abraham. And the Jewish people would study the Old Testament. I'm not sure the proper term, but whatever, that part of the Testament, and the Christians have the New Testament. So similarities there within those faiths, but definitely some significant differences. So Hare Krishna is actually part of what's called Vaishnavism. If somebody's do a little studies within the broad variety of Hindu traditions, Vaishnavism, many scholars say it's the prominent one. We are like Gaudiya Vaishnavas. It's kind of like being whatever Southern Baptists within Protestants within Christians, kind of like that. So we are members of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, which means particularly we're followers of Chaitanya, who I mentioned earlier, the 16th century saint. And we particularly, Vaishnavas in general, are stress the concept of monotheism. God is a person. We have a personal relationship with him. And the goal of life is to serve God and to connect with God. There are other Hindu traditions who would advocate when one practices a spiritual life and kind of awakens their spiritual identity, whereas we would say that identity is we're servants of God. Some other Hindus say, well, no, actually you are God. You merge into God. And they give the example like a drop of water merges into the ocean. But eventually, but we we don't agree with that. we love our brothers and sisters of other Hindu traditions, but philosophically, we kind of find that actually a little offensive to God, because God is great. I'm small. To say that I can become God, we find it's not the ultimate teachings of the scripture, and it's not. We say ultimately it can't satisfy the soul. The soul's looking to love God. It's like if you say you love your wife, you don't want to become your wife. You love your kids. You don't want to become your kids. You want to love your kids. So the fact that there's two, there can be love without two personalities. So we don't want to merge into God, even if we could. We want to serve God.
You mentioned, all religions have diversity within the tradition, and certainly we've got it within Christianity, and we always haven't done a good job of playing together well through our differences. Sometimes we do, but there's been a lot of rancor. And even I remember in seminary taking courses in church history and just being appalled by the spilled blood and the violence over different disagreements over things like baptism and so on. How are the disagreements between the Krishna movement and other Hindu? Is that usually handled fairly well, or can it be cantankerous within your tradition as well?
Well, I'm not a historian, so I can't say for sure. I don't think there has been historically as much, as you said, bloodletting and things like that. But I know there's been some, but not quite to that extent, because there is a very powerful kind of undercurrent in all Hindu traditions that everyone is a spiritual being, has an eternal connection with the divine, however they see that. And there's more of, I think, an openness, historically it has been, to you pursue God as you understand the divine or him to be. I'm on my particular path. So you can see that in India today. I don't know, is that a good reflection of the culture? That's questionable. I mean, is America today a good representative of Christianity? That's a good question. But, historically, Jews way back centuries ago went to India because it was more open-minded and broad-minded, and there is a history of a high degree of religious tolerance that comes about from the tradition, and this idea that it's not like there's one life and our truth is the only truth and you have to accept it. Within Vaishnavism, and I mentioned before we started the show, we've done many years of Vaishnava Christian dialogue. because we generally feel we can and should learn from each other, and that kind of in that spirit we should keep an open mind towards other traditions, because we can always learn something. There's one teacher centuries ago that said, you should take gold even from a filthy place, and you should take good instructions wherever you find it, and he said even from a fool. So even if you think somebody's foolish, you may not like the Hare Krishnas, but if they've got one or two good ideas, why not take it on board? And we may be strong believers in God, but I have some atheistic and agnostic friends. They've got some good ideas. Well, I should take those and add that to my life as well.
Well, you mentioned dialogue. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how ISKCON has been involved in interfaith dialogue?
Yes, happy to. That's actually something I've been fortunate enough to participate in. We started, I think, the first official kind of formal dialogue was held, a Vaishnava Christian dialogue was held in England, in UK and Wales, actually. And then starting, I think, 1996, we held the first Vaishnava Christian dialogue in the States, a formal kind of a thing. And we organized it around a 2-day retreat. And we would choose a topic, and we would have papers written by a Christian representative and a Vaishnava representative. And we've tried to make a point of having, because there are actually 4 primary Vaishnava traditions. So we would have a little bit of variety from who's presenting from the Vaishnava side. And one year a Protestant would present the paper from the Christian side, and one year a Catholic. And we would choose topics like the name of God or the kingdom of God. Or one year we chose, it was nice, my favorite year was Spirit in the World, Renunciation, or Affirmation, because both, I think, in Christian traditions and in the Vaishnava traditions, there's a little bit of a challenge, like a little bit, I know, Jesus, 10 commandments, honor your father and mother, but that one person came and said, well, I want to be your father, but I have to go bury my father. And he said, you're not worthy. So, there's some like, wow, what does that mean? How do we understand that? How do we apply that to modern life? So there's some tension also in the Vaishnava tradition, that the world is, we should renounce the desire to enjoy the world separately from God, but that doesn't mean we don't care about the world and the people in it and how to live properly. So those are some things that can be misunderstood. So we've had these dialogues now for 25 years. And I started a similar thing in India a few years ago, Vaishnava Christian dialogue in India. And because of COVID, we've had to do it online the last couple of years. But what's really wonderful, amazing is that this group of people have developed a real strong, it's about 20 people both times, 10, 12 people from, both sides of the dialogue. I keep going like that because it means like quote. So people wondering, what am I doing? Batting flies. As an example, the first year we did it in India, there was one of the women, Vaishnava women who I work with closely, who's based in Bombay. She's the communications director for West India. And we had one of the Catholic participants was a woman named Sister Teresa, not Mother Teresa, but Sister Teresa. So my colleague Parijata was seen on the list of people, well, Teresa, and she kept asking me, who's this Teresa? I said, well, I don't really know her. She was recommended by a bishop, and she's coming. But when she came, the two of them realized that Parijata was a former student of Teresa in a Catholic school, and had actually gone to a Catholic school her entire life in India. And Teresa was one of her, I don't remember what year, but she was one of her teachers, maybe for a few years, who she had tremendous affection for. She remembered her. So in the process of this dialogue, Parijata said, well, I want to take a minute and thank my, particularly Catholics, and she happened to go to Catholic school, thank my Christian friends, because I went to the Catholic school and I really felt it rooted me deeply in a spirituality and a quest to understand and serve God. And then I knew she was going to say that, but then somebody else who was like a renounced monk, a Swami in the Hare Krishnas or ISKCON, he said, well, I should also, spontaneously, I didn't expect this. He said, well, I should also want to thank all of my Catholic, because I also went to Catholic school for 12 years. And then there was a third person who said, well, my wife went to Catholic school. So I was just thinking, actually, how beautiful it is that these people who were raised in Hindu families, perhaps Vaishnava families, and dedicated their lives. These were seriously committed ISKCON Krishna devotees, but their lives have been enriched by what they learned in the Christian schools. And I think also that time, sometimes there's some friction, some criticism sometimes. What's the purpose of these religious schools? We also, we feed 1.2 million children in India every day. And I'm through our Hare Krishna Food for Life and Hare Krishna Food Relief programs. I'm really proud when I see a video when they've got a Muslim principal saying how we're feeding kids at a Muslim school, at a Christian school, or this or that we can help each other. So in the same way that this woman and these men had this experience to say they're very serious practitioners of the Vaishnava faith, but it was enriched by their foundation, what they got. It was obviously their parents took them to temple and this and that, but they enriched them. And I think that's really the beauty of interfaith dialogue, that when I come away from a dialogue, and I've said this in our dialogues, when I walk away from a dialogue with our Christians, because they're very serious people and very open people and very honest people and very faithful people, when I walk away from that dialogue, I really feel my faith in Krishna is enriched by hearing them talk about their faith in Jesus and the challenges that they face in trying to be Christians at a very, it's not much of a Christian world these days in terms of people practicing real, genuine religiosity, not as a criticism of Christianity, just criticism of this crazy materialistic world we're living in these days.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's okay to have a criticism. I'm many times critical of my own tribe, so that's important.
One of the things we share in our dialogues is criticism of our own tribes. None of us has it completely right, and somebody says they do. Those are people I get scared about personally.
I've got a couple of questions related to your culture, your cultural expressions. What is the significance of temples and festivals?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Well, temples, if we do temples first, we understand Chaitanya particularly emphasized that we need to come together in community, or it's called Sankirtan. We need to congregationally chant about God and hear about God and serve God and learn about God. And that idea of community is very, very important to us. So temple is a place where we come together to try to do those things. Like in our Sunday program, we share food. We're vegetarian. We share a wonderful, very tasty vegetarian feast that's prepared for everybody, anybody and everybody that comes, members of the community, visitors, first timers. We serve a big meal. We do some singing together. I think not unlike some Christian traditions that have some pretty vibrant singing in church, and people get enthused by that. And we'll have a talk on one of our scriptures, either Bhagavad Gita or the Bhagavatam, and have a real sense of community. So the temple is there primarily as a place to build a sense of community. And then festivals are really important to it. And there's I think we don't have an exact number. We not so good at keeping count of things as some traditions are. With approximately 600, 650 temples around the world now, ISKCON temples. And again, this is all coming from Swami Prabhupada, who came to America in 1965. So, pretty significant growth. There's thousands of temples of Krishna in India, but ones that are particularly part of our organization, about 650. And then festivals, well, just to mention, like the idea of temple, there are other Hindu traditions. Sometimes you have this kind of idea of the lone sadhu, saintly person, like a desert father, and the early years of Christianity, goes off into the wilderness and meditates and prays by himself. So there are lineages that teach like that. Ours is different. Ours is stay wherever you are. If you're married, fine. If you got a job, fine. Just put God in the center of what you do. So therefore, temples, most of our temples are in cities. Some are in rural areas. We're also creating so many eco farms. That's another topic. And then festivals are a big thing because we practice bhakti yoga, which means the yoga of devotion. All that you do, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, all that you do, all that you eat, all that you offer and give away, as well as any austerities or sacrifices you may perform when you give of yourself for some other purpose. It says, do that as an offering to me. So whatever we do in life, we should try to dedicate to God. So it's a very happy, it's a really joyful tradition. I was just at a men's retreat in West Virginia for 3 days. And it's just being with a bunch of guys and talking about how to be better men and how to be better husbands. We had a whole panel on fatherhood. and watched, grown men cry about what it means to have a baby when that baby first came into the world, the challenges that they face trying to be, what does it mean to be a father, and to really, this person is not in the world to fulfill the things I wanted to do, but I'm here to try to help them be what they can be. Those types of things. We had a whole panel on toxic masculinity, which is definitely not just a Hare Krishna thing. It's a problem for men all around the world. We sometimes misuse our power with women. So we wanted to talk, but then, we spent hours, we had a big bonfire and we told stories and, had some really wonderful meals together and sang and danced together, which is probably the most fun part. Again, singing our prayers to God. So these festivals are similar to that. It's a big part of what we do. It's kind of like, I've read some things about like the Black church and particularly, I don't know if this still continues. I mean, Sunday wasn't just an hour in church, it's like the whole day, right? And you come and you go to church and you sing and you talk and you preach and you amen. And then you go outside and you play games with the kids and have a meal, have a lunch. And, it's a whole community thing. So festivals are like that. So some of the big festivals we've drawn from India, there's one called the Festival of the Giant Chariots, or Rath Yatra. And this is something that's a big chariot. It's about 40 feet high. It's beautifully colored, red, yellow, blue canopy. And people pull the cart with music. And this year I went to New York City. We go right down Fifth Avenue. We're one of the parades that goes down Fifth Avenue every year for, I don't know, 30, 40 blocks, and they have a big parade at the end with the stages with music and entertainment. And again, a free feast. There's never a Hare Krishna program without a free feast. There's a free feast and displays on yoga and meditation, vegetarianism. And so it's just, we try to have a lot of fun. And that's something it's in New York, it's in LA, it's in Detroit, it's in Atlanta, it's in Philadelphia coming up at the end of this month. It's in London, ends up at Trafalgar Square. So that's one of the many festivals we have.
But it's interesting to me how different religious cultures have different expressions. When I first moved to Utah, I saw the Latter-day Saints. They used to do these big dramatic pageants, and that was an important part of their expression. I noted in your publication that you sent me that devotees, as the publication says, they immerse themselves in an artistic lifestyle of spiritual music, dance, design, and drama. What part does that play in Krishna culture?
Yeah, it's a big part because again, it really kind of goes back to our deeper philosophy that I've forgotten God, and my life should be centered around remembering God. Like this painting behind me, it's a beautiful Orison style, and it portrays like a Leela of great saints or incarnations of God, God's message. And I'm looking around my room, it's like our idea is that I've got bookshelves. If they're not religious, they're about religion. I like history. I've got a few history books too. But then our music and our homes and everything should be to try to help connect us with God, to try to help us remember God, because the world's out there trying to get us to forget God. You drive down the highway and it's like, buy this, buy that, go here, go there. And as we know, I mean, there's whole sciences developed how to convince us that we need things that we don't. You mentioned earlier, you got to get the new smartphone. Of course, teenagers are particularly prey to their promotions, but adults too, and that we want to try to change this. So festivals and the dance and the drama and the things you mentioned, we'd like to go to the temple and be so attracted to the beauty in the temple that we're not so attracted to what's going on in the world. And that like Christian rock, I don't know much about Christian rock, but the little bit I've heard, I mean, some of it's like really inspiring. I come from the 70s, right? So rock and roll is kind of like in my blood a little bit. And again, I don't know much about it, but I remember that there's one song that I was really moved by where, and maybe it's a famous group, I don't know, but it was some lyrics like, like, God, please steal my show. Like, they're here to hear me, but please, God, I'm here for you. This is your show. And so that calling is there in everything we do. And we have our particular culture expression how to do that. We feel that really should be stressed and emphasized. So our minds can really be focused on God.
Yeah, I grew up in the 1970s as well. And I remember I didn't become a Christian until the 1980s, but my early involvement in looking at other religions was this kind of countercult. Here's orthodoxy and there's heresy, and one of those groups that was considered heretical with the counterculture. You have these Eastern groups coming in, and there was some alarm in the secular world. So you had the rise of the secular anti-cult, you have the Christian countercult, but a lot has changed over 50 years. How has perception of the Hare Krishnas, how has that changed and really become more mainstream over time?
Yeah, good question. I think part of it is more people are, with modern communications and things like that, and every week you watch a TV show about CNN traveling around all these exotic places, and I think we're more exposed than we were in the past. That there are worldviews that are very different from ours, and at the same time very similar, depending what kind of lenses we look through. I think maybe I don't know, maybe Americans are become a little more humble in recent years. That I think maybe there's a sense of, I don't know if we have solutions to everything. At least some people think like that. Maybe we should look outside the box a little bit. I think spiritually, a lot of people, sometimes it sets off controversies, but yoga, it becomes a popular thing, and some people, well, what's behind the yoga? And of course, you can just do exercises and not cross the line of feeling it's offensive to your faith or whatever. But many people, what's behind that? And there is a spirituality behind that, and what's the meaning there? I would hope part of it is that the Krishna movement itself has become better suited at kind of presenting ourselves. I mean, you mentioned a child in the 70s. I'll take you back. I was on the Larry King Live show some years ago. His show wasn't quite as famous as yours is, but some people were watching him back in those days. And I remember, he was kind of asking about Krishnas in the airports that you mentioned briefly, which was something we did a lot in the early days. And most of those Hare Krishna devotees in the airports were 20, 22, 25, maybe. We didn't have a lot of old people like myself because it was a new thing. So, generally younger people take up something new easier than older people do. So I think we brought in some of those problems ourselves and being a little aggressive and stepping on people's toes. And, I remember I publicly apologized on the Larry King show in front of 10 million people or something like that for our excesses. But I also remember too, I don't know which denomination coined the phrase, but I've heard that it started with Christianity, but we all should use it. Lord, save me from the convert. Sometimes, somebody gets some new idea. I mean, like salespeople, right? You get convinced this is the newest and the best thing, and sometimes you push it too hard. So I think part of that we brought in ourselves, but I think there's a maturing people to see. A lot of people that I may be Christian, but I can learn. A lot of us, maybe we're Christian. We have a Muslim doctor, or a Hindu dentist, or my daughter's being taught by a Buddhist lady at school, and we start to see those people differently, and maybe we're more willing to ask, well, what is it that motivates you in terms of your religious identification? And maybe I don't believe what you believe, but you seem to be a pretty good person. There must be something pretty valuable there. So I think a lot of those factors there. And of course, there's a lot more Indian Americans now than there were back then. There was the government changed the laws in 1965 or 66. There were, immigration policies against people coming from India. So there's a lot more Hindus of Vaishnava and other traditions, other what we call sampradayas. So I think people are more exposed to meeting real Hindus, real Vaishnavas, real Hare Krishnas. I think that has a difference too. So a lot of factors I think have contributed. And with the anti-cult people, it's interesting because I haven't been in a few years, but I started going to those folks have conferences, and I started going to those conferences a few years ago, dressed as a Hare Krishna devotee, and I'm pretty much your giveaway when you dress like this. And everybody, you're not hiding anything. because there were a lot of criticisms of us. I said, well, what have we done? What's wrong? And like any organization, whatever part of the political spectrum we're on, we have to admit we've had some political leaders in America that embarrass the heck out of us and make a lot of mistakes. We've all had religious leaders. We've all had issues with in schools, and so there's leadership problems everywhere. And we've certainly had those, our share of those. So I, would meet with these folks, say, what are your issues with us? Tell us, how can we learn how to do better? And maybe there's some things you've overgeneralized. You've kind of threw us in with, all anybody from India is the same. Well, sorry, there's a billion plus people over there. Sometimes people say any religious person is the same. Krishnas and Hare Krishnas and Catholics, and they're all, well, we have some similarities, but you have to look at us individually too. So and I think that I know we definitely learned some things from those dialogues. In fact, there was one member, the head of what was one of the larger International Cultic Studies Association, Dr. Michael Langoni. We both attended something called the World Parliament of Religions a few years ago. And I invited him, would he be on a panel with me, the two of us, two speakers, and we talked about spiritual abuse. We didn't have the whole plenary session, but there's maybe a few thousand people at this meeting. We were one of the many to talk about how we all, whether we're, mainstream Christian or evangelical Christian or one of the different, Jewish communities or Buddhist, whatever, we all have to be careful about abusive leadership, because it exists in the world, and not to say that Jesus had one bad apostle. You don't throw the rest of them out because of the one. That would be foolish. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think not only has your organization changed and matured, the culture has as well, and so things are always moving along, and it's important to adjust our perceptions and way of engagement accordingly. One final question, unless you've got something, I'll give you an opportunity to bring up something I might have missed. And then what do you see as the legacy of the Swami? You've been here now for over 50 years, and you've certainly developed and changed, and perceptions have changed. What does that ongoing legacy look like?
Yeah, that's the kind of question it's good to ask somebody as they get older, because legacy is the more important thing. Well, I'm biased because of where I'm sitting and what I'm doing, but I also, I go to the American Academy of Religion. I try to learn about other religions, and I've been doing interfaith dialogue for years, and I read a lot of different things. I really feel that in the future years, that Bhaktivedanta Swami is going to be seen as one of the really great modern day historical religious figures. And he brought this tradition of bhakti, of devotion to God, from India around the world. We've got, a significant communities in Europe and South America and Africa and Russia, Australia. And I think he really did kind of touch people in an important way, and gave them some practical and yet very deeply philosophical means. So I think the legacy hopefully is going to be that this Vaishnava tradition was spread around the world, and perhaps, as Harvey Cox, a religion professor from Harvard University years ago, said, maybe he reminded people a little bit more about the importance of going deep in their own tradition. Because our purpose, we are evangelical, if I can borrow that word. We are a missionary community. We generally feel that the world's going the wrong direction. People should reconnect with God. People should look and think more carefully about how we're living and the effect it's having on the environment. I'm very active in an environmental project with an ISKCON to kind of green our temples and go further from there. And I'll put a little plug in, if you don't mind. I don't think it should be controversial, but I think it is for some people. If you want to know one thing you can do to help the environment, folks, please eat lower on the food chain and think about more veggies and less meat, because it's not good for us. It's not good for the environment. So, we're trying to do things to help across the board. And hopefully we provide a path for some people to go very deep in their own spiritual lives, and that we can be a contributing member of the larger communities of cultures and faiths and spiritual practices to help us all kind of refocus on what matters most in life. And I think there's a lot of warning signs. You look at what's happening environmentally. There's a lot of signs out there that are becoming more and more apparent. We need to reevaluate which way we're going as a society, and really think that the world cannot provide what we're trying to consume. We're just living at a pace of life that's it's on overdrive. It's overheating the planet, and even you could say the political systems and all of that. And I mean, I read something the other day. I think it's Vivek Murthy, the U.S. Surgeon General. I'm not sure he's of Indian origin. I should have his name right, but he was describing that loneliness he used the word, it's a pandemic in America these days. We're flooded with smartphones and social media, but so many people are feeling lonely. He just says it's an epidemic for here. In teenagers, there's so many issues. We're all aware of all the issues that are there, and I think those are. We would say, ISKCON would say, Vaishnavism would say, I would say, as a humble practitioner, these are messages from God that we're going the wrong way. In general, I mean, some of us may be very deep in our spiritual practice, but in general, as a society, it's materialism on overdrive, and it doesn't satisfy people. That was the first step for me. I was speaking with a young friend who was a law student at Howard Law School here in DC the other day, and we were kind of sharing notes. I'm about 40 years ahead of him in the timeline. But I remember as a student at Michigan State University, kind of trying to figure out what's wrong with the world and how am I supposed to fit in. And my parents came up to visit, and we're having kind of like a weekend with another couple friends of theirs. And this friend of my father's told me, he said, you should really understand these are the best years of your life and take advantage of them. And he was probably 50. I was, 19 or 20. And I remember thinking, I'm not really happy at this stage of my life. And everybody's telling me that I need to go to college to get a degree, to get a job, to make money, to have a wife and a house and have kids. Everything you have, sir, this man was talking to me. I should work hard to get everything you have. And you're telling me that you were happiest when you were my age and you didn't have any of these things. And if I'm honest, I'm not happy now. So, something's wrong in this formula here. And you mentioned you became a Christian in the 80s. So at some point in time, you also had an experience like that. There's something missing. And I think as people of religious faith and followers of great religious teachers and representatives of God, we really have kind of responsibility to try to share that message with people. I love going to our festivals for some reason. Sometimes I meet some really wonderful Christian people that in their own enthusiasm to tell people about Jesus come to our festivals. And, sometimes thinking we got to save these people from this Krishna stuff, which is going the wrong way. But I'm like, I mean, sometimes people are frankly a little obnoxious and aggressive, but, they try to disrupt. But a lot of people that are there that spread the message of Jesus. And I always feel like, wow, Lord, let me become so deep in my faith in you that I feel comfortable going out and spending all day Saturday trying to tell people, about God and as I understand it. So I think that's the legacy. Hopefully we can contribute to. In one of our texts, it says, we hope to see a re-spiritualization of human society, that human life really is meant first and foremost for spiritual growth. It's not meant to consume. I read something, maybe end with this, John, that there was an article in the paper today about, they were talking about, students in college, how people that study humanities, according to some recent poll, they're much more likely to regret their career choice than STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, math. And then it talked about, then their primary measurement was, inside they had a big chart about if you study, religion was the bottom of the chart. It was under whatever it's for cosmetic, whatever the proper word is, if you're a beautician or something. They make less money if you get a degree in religion. And it had this old chart going up, and the top was engineering or something like that. But I was thinking, okay, great, you can make more money, but is that the only measure? There's a lot of very unhappy rich people out there. So why are we stressing it? And if people study humanities because that's how you learn how to think, and you study history and you study philosophy and all the great things that help people be thinking people, as opposed to just producing agents. Not that that's all that happens from people that study STEM, but they don't train you how to think. They don't train you how to think about, why am I here, and why do people have to grow old? Why do people have to suffer? Why do people have to die? Why is there war? Why is there racism in the world? We feel these are the questions that are meant to stimulate us into thinking about, is there another purpose for this life other than trying to squeeze out a few years, which, of course, Christians understand there's more to life, but, many people don't. And it's a shame.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think anybody in any tradition can lose sight of the important things and the essence of what their tradition is about, and materialism is so enticing and yet so fleeting at the same time. So I appreciate that.
I like that. Enticing and fleeting at the same time. I'm going to remember that.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate it. We had talked before we started recording about the possibility of doing some other things, and I hope we can pursue that. And I hope you'll come back and we can continue to have these kinds of conversations.
I'd be happy to. And thank you for having me, John. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah, this is the podcast for Multi-Faith Matters. Again, my guest today, I'm going to take another stab at getting the name correctly. Anuttama, there we go, Das. And you can look in the program notes and find his bio. You can find links to the ISKCON website and a helpful magazine that we've used as kind of an outline today, where you can get more information about what ISKCON is all about. I would like to thank my listeners and my viewers. Until the next episode.